In the tranquil yet tense hours leading up to mid-morning on December the 7th, 1941, an ominous silence settled over the vast Pacific Ocean, specifically surrounding the formidable fleet anchored at Pearl Harbor. It was a silence that seemed almost unnatural, a vast vacuum that grew more unsettling with each passing moment. Quietly, the Japanese Imperial Navy's communication system, meticulously maintained and used for strategic coordination, fell into an eerie stillness. One by one, the submarines that Admiral Soma Toyoda had carefully positioned across the ocean, serving as silent sentinels and invisible eyes in the vast expanses of the Pacific, began to go silent as well. As reports of these unsettling losses arrived at Japan's imperial headquarters, the High Command swiftly realized that something unprecedented was unfolding in naval warfare, an unknown force at work, disrupting even the most carefully laid plans. Whispers of a strange, new weapon circulating in the shadows, and a mysterious American vessel acting in ways no one had seen before, created a sense of dread and bewilderment. The Japanese sailors and commanders faced a scenario unlike any encountered in naval history, hinting at an enemy that was utilizing tactics and technologies yet unseen in the theater of maritime combat. Meanwhile, across the vast Pacific Ocean, in a different part of the world, a young officer was just beginning his journey into the chaos that was about to unfold. Ensign John C. England, having spent months undergoing rigorous training at various naval ports along the American mainland, had recently arrived at the idyllic and peaceful islands of Hawaii. His mission was clear: to serve and uphold the United States Navy's duties, ready to face whatever challenges might soon come. On the early morning of December the 7th, before the first light of dawn pierced the horizon, England reported for duty in the radio room of the USS Oklahoma, a formidable battleship moored gracefully along Battleship Row in Pearl Harbor. The ship itself was a veteran, carrying decades of history, originally commissioned during the First World War era. Over the years, the Oklahoma had shielded Allied convoys crossing the Atlantic, safeguarding vital supplies and personnel. Later, during the Spanish Civil War, she had participated in rescue operations, aiding American citizens and refugees fleeing conflict. Despite these storied pasts, none of those deeds held any significance at that moment. As the sun slowly ascended above the lush landscapes of Oahu, a seemingly ordinary day was about to turn into an infamous moment etched into history. Suddenly, distant shapes appeared in the blue sky. Thousands of aircraft silhouetted against the sunlight, approaching with menacing precision. The relentless droning of engine noise grew louder and louder, transforming into a terrifying roar that signaled imminent destruction. Without warning, hundreds of Japanese aircraft descended upon Pearl Harbor, unleashing chaos upon the already peaceful harbor. At approximately 7:50 in the morning, the USS Oklahoma was violently shaken by the first of numerous torpedo strikes, ripping through the water and metal indiscriminately. Within moments, Ensign England was thrown into disarray. In the radio room, he struggled to stabilize himself as the battleship trembled violently around him. Torpedoes struck repeatedly, 3 in the opening minutes alone, causing the hull to twist and groan under the assault. The once proud vessel began to list sharply to one side, tilting at an increasingly alarming angle as her structural integrity faltered. An emergency order to abandon ship was issued, echoing across the chaos. Yet, amidst the frantic scramble for safety, England, the young officer, found himself at a critical crossroads. Instead of immediately fleeing, he made a split-second decision rooted in duty and compassion. Ignoring direct orders to evacuate, he chose to venture deeper into the flooded corridors of the sinking vessel. His goal was clear: to help those trapped and injured beneath the chaos, refusing to abandon shipmates in their moment of peril. With unwavering resolve, he made a series of perilous trips, each one capturing his courage and selflessness as he dragged dazed and wounded sailors away from the rising waters and collapsing bulkheads. His actions exemplified bravery that would define his character and service. However, As the Oklahoma continued to list and eventually began to roll over, his relentless effort was brought to an end. On the outside, enemy planes strafed the water with gunfire, mercilessly tearing into the lifeboats and sailors desperately trying to escape. Hit by as many as 8 torpedoes, the Oklahoma sank within a mere 12 minutes, leaving only her starboard keel visible above the waterline. That morning, out of the 429 sailors aboard, including young Ensign John C. England, only a handful survived. The tragic loss of life and the destruction wrought that day shocked the entire nation. The following day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed the American people with a speech that would echo through history, marking the moment when the United States could no longer remain on the sidelines of global conflict. Despite years of effort to stay out of World War II, the attack on Pearl Harbor had made it painfully clear. This was now a war that had become deeply personal for every American citizen. Against the relentless tide of conflict that swept across the Pacific, Japan found itself increasingly strained and battered by the year 1944. Its naval forces, long seen as a formidable and nearly invincible armada, now bore the marks of relentless battles and diminishing resources. Yet, despite the evident wear and tear, Japan's Imperial Command refused to acknowledge outright defeat. The enemy had grown stronger, not just in raw numbers, but in technological capability, training, and strategic ingenuity. American aircraft carriers, planes, and a new breed of pilots, meticulously trained and rapidly produced, effectively outpaced Japan's own ability to keep up with the pace of technological and tactical advancements. The United States, with its sophisticated industries and relentless industrial war machine, had begun surpassing Japan in the very tools it once held as its strength: aircraft carriers, planes, and well-drilled airmen. As this new balance of power shifted more decisively in favor of the Allies, Japan was forced into a precarious position. Its navy, though still proud and capable, was increasingly outmatched and outpaced on many fronts. Faced with this dire reality, the Japanese command was far from ready to surrender or accept defeat. Instead, they sought a bold, last-ditch strategy to turn the tide in their favor and push back against the rising American dominance in the Pacific. The mastermind behind this desperate plan was Admiral Somu Toyota, then the commander-in-chief of Japan's combined fleet. Recognizing that conventional tactics would no longer suffice, Toyota devised a daring operation, which he designated Operation Ego. The core idea was to lure the U.S. Navy into a decisive, final confrontation, ideally near the Mariana Islands, a strategic location in the Central Pacific that offered a chance for Japan to strike a crippling blow. To achieve this, Japan intended to bring to bear the full might of its first mobile fleet. This formidable force would be supported by hundreds of land-based aircraft and long-range carrier planes, all aimed at delivering a swift and devastating attack. The ultimate objective was none other than the complete annihilation of the American fleet before it could effectively retaliate, a plan that, if successful, might halt the relentless advance of U.S. forces and shift the momentum back in Japan's favor. However, a significant obstacle stood in the way of this ambitious plan. Over the months leading up to Operation Ego, Japan's reconnaissance capabilities, their eyes and ears in the vast Pacific Ocean, had deteriorated substantially. The skies above had become dominated by Allied air superiority, a formidable force that controlled and monitored the region relentlessly. American fighters and reconnaissance aircraft patrolled the vast skies, intercepting Japanese signals and disrupting maritime operations at every turn. Compounding this problem was the advanced American encryption system known as the Gen 25 code, which rendered Japanese radio communications increasingly indecipherable and unreliable. This loss of effective intelligence placed Japan at a strategic disadvantage. They lacked up-to-date, actionable information about American movements and intentions. In a desperate effort to compensate for this critical intelligence shortfall, the Japanese Imperial Navy turned to one of their last remaining strategic tools: submarines. These underwater vessels, silent and unseen, were viewed as invaluable assets in gathering vital information and in striking unseen blows. The core of this effort consisted of 7 code-type submarines, each assigned a critical mission. Their task was to disperse along a roughly 200-mile stretch of open sea lying between New Guinea and the Caroline Islands. This zone was designated as the area of operation for what Japan called the NA Line, a carefully planned formation intended to serve as an oceanic spy post. The submarines would patrol and monitor activity within this zone, seeking any sign of an approaching American force. If they succeeded in detecting any U.S. task force, a carrier group, a fleet, or a convoy, the Japanese command hoped to spring a trap. The plan was to deceive the Americans into exposing their positions, then unleash the full fury of Japan's fleet in what they hoped would be a carefully orchestrated ambush, capable of turning the tide of the war and delivering a crippling blow to American naval power. What Admiral Toyota failed entirely to comprehend was that, even as he activated his meticulous plan, the Americans had already gained ground in the shadows through their cryptanalysts and codebreakers. At Pearl Harbor, the very heart of the Pacific Fleet, a dedicated team of cryptographers working within the Fleet Radio Unit, Pacific FRUPAC, had successfully intercepted and deciphered crucial Japanese military communications. These intercepted signals made it clear that Japan was deploying submarines across the region, with plans to gather intelligence and possibly launch attacks. This intelligence was too valuable to ignore. Without delay, the Americans launched a well-coordinated response, deploying a specialized combat group from Purvis Bay. This task force was known as Escort Division 39, a formidable hunter-killer unit formed around a trio of Buckley-class destroyer escorts: the USS George, the USS Raby, and the USS England. The USS England, notably, was named in honor of a young sailor who had lost his life aboard the USS Oklahoma during the surprise attack at Pearl Harbor, symbolizing the sacrifice and resolve of the United States in this ongoing struggle. The Buckley-class represented a new generation of naval warfare technology. Over 100 of these swift, heavily armed ships were rapidly produced by the United States during the years of 1943 and 1944 in response to the mounting demands of Pacific warfare. Originally conceived as convoy escorts to protect vital supply lines from the deadly threat of submarines, these vessels quickly proved their worth in the relentless hunt for enemies lurking below the surface. Taller, faster, and more resilient than their predecessors, the Everett-class ships, the Buckley-class destroyer escorts were fitted with the latest sonar and radar systems, granting them enhanced ability to detect and track submarines. They boasted an impressive array of weapons, including triple-mounted 3-inch guns capable of unleashing rapid and devastating fire, complemented by multiple anti-aircraft batteries manned by crews trained to deliver precise, high-impact attacks against enemy vessels and aircraft alike. Yet, perhaps the most feared weapon aboard the Buckley-class ships was the Hedgehog, an innovative British-designed anti-submarine weapon that became legendary among Allied sailors. Unlike traditional depth charges, which exploded at preset depths, the Hedgehog was a forward-firing device that launched a salvo of 24 small, high-explosive projectiles in a tight, circular pattern directly ahead of the ship. This allowed for more accurate and immediate attacks against submerged submarines, significantly increasing the likelihood of a kill. The Hedgehog's deadly efficiency and its innovative firing method struck fear into Japanese submariners more than any other weapon system, promising a much higher success rate against their underwater craft. The development and deployment of this sophisticated weapon marked a new era in naval warfare, embodying the relentless technological advancements driven by the urgency of the Pacific War. In this high-stakes game of cat and mouse beneath the waves and across the vast ocean, both sides relied heavily on their intelligence, technology, and tactical ingenuity. The Japanese, despite their ambitious plans and valiant efforts, faced an increasingly difficult challenge in outmatching American cryptanalysts and the cutting-edge anti-submarine systems now employed by the Allies. The outcome hinged on the precise interplay of intelligence gathering, deception, and technological dominance, A complex dance of strategy played out amid the stormy waters of the Pacific, with the future of the conflict hanging delicate but decisive in the balance. Unlike traditional depth charges, which detonated at predetermined depths and frequently failed to strike their intended targets, the Hedgehog represented a significant technological advancement in anti-submarine warfare. Instead of relying on timed explosions that often missed or caused ships to lose sonar contact just when accuracy was most critical, the Hedgehog was designed as a contact-fused device that would only explode upon direct impact with submarine. This innovative feature radically changed the dynamics of underwater combat, offering naval forces a much greater chance of success. Prior to the advent of the Hedgehog, warships faced a considerable and often perilous blind spot when engaging enemy submarines. The typical method involved approaching the suspected position of a submarine and then releasing depth charges from the aft of the vessel as it withdrew or passed overhead. However, this tactic required ships to pass directly over the target to ensure an effective attack. During this maneuver, naval crews often lost sonar contact with a submarine at the most critical moment, just before deploying their weapon and immediately after maneuvering into the attack position. Such moments of contact loss could allow the enemy submarine to evade the attack altogether, slipping away into the depths through quick evasive maneuvers or simply diving deeper. It was a game of uncertainty, where the effectiveness of the attack depended heavily on luck and timing. The introduction of the Hedgehog transformed this dangerous game into a more precise and effective process. Its forward launch capability meant that destroyers and other naval vessels could now fire their payloads directly ahead of their movement path, thereby enabling them to keep their sonar systems engaged on the target right up until the moment of delivery. This was a staggering improvement in tactical efficiency because it allowed ships to maintain continuous contact with the submarine, drastically reducing the chances for the enemy to evade or escape. When a Hedgehog mortar impacted a target, it resulted in an immediate explosion, leaving no room for counterattack or retaliation from the submerged enemy. The weapon was loaded with a substantial charge of Torpex, an explosive compound approximately 50% more powerful than standard TNT, combined with 35 pounds of this explosive per mortar. The force of a single direct hit was capable of tearing through thick steel hulls of submarines, causing catastrophic damage that could send the vessel crashing to the ocean floor within seconds. For Axis submarine crews, this new weapon was an utter nightmare, drastically increasing the danger they faced during underwater operations. The hunt for enemy submarines was a relentless and carefully coordinated pursuit. The first submarine targeted by the Hunter Group aboard the USS George was not a part of the Roe-class submarine group designated to support formations along the North American line, but rather one of Japan's larger and more formidable submarines, a Type C-1, known as I-16. This vessel was no stranger to combat, having previously participated in the infamous attack on Pearl Harbor. Some years earlier, she had carried a midget submarine tasked with slipping into the harbor ahead of the main air assault, aiming to sabotage American ships and installations. By the time of the current engagement, I-16 had been reassigned to serve a different, yet still vital role, conducting supply missions to reach Japanese troops stranded in the remote regions around Ben, Papua New Guinea. Before she could complete her resupply mission, the Allied forces were rapidly closing in. A patrolling aircraft spotted the I-16 north of Bougainville and quickly relayed her position to Allied Naval Command, triggering the deployment of a destroyer escort division. This flotilla consisted of several fast, maneuverable ships arranged in a broad, sweeping formation, each vessel positioned approximately 4,000 yards apart to maximize coverage and tracking capabilities. The destroyers moved in parallel, carefully following the submarine's movements while maintaining a tight formation that allowed for rapid response and coordinated attack. On the 19th of May, the destroyer USS England First made consistent sonar contact with I-16. However, the Japanese submarine was far from an easy target. Below the surface, it exhibited signs of aggressive evasive tactics, executing sharp, fishtailing maneuvers, swinging its stern from side to side in rapid, unpredictable turns. This classic evasive action created a confusing sonar signature, causing pings to scatter and making precise targeting difficult. Despite these challenges, the crew of the USS England was determined not to let the veteran enemy submarine escape. With exceptional skill and persistence, the destroyers surged forward at high speed, staying closely on the tail of their elusive prey. Each time the USS England drew near enough to launch an attack, the I-16 responded with another sudden, violent turn, almost as if it were alive and fighting to break free. This constant twisting and turning caused the sonar readings to fluctuate unpredictably, forcing the destroyer's crew to repeatedly recalibrate their sensors and calculations. Recognizing the urgency of the situation, Commander Walton B. Pendleton issued the order to open fire. His crew responded swiftly, launching a series of spigot mortars from the destroyer's bow. These were specialized Hedgehog projectiles designed for rapid deployment. Despite their efforts, the initial salvo missed the rapidly shifting target altogether. Undeterred by the first failure, the crew launched 2 more volleys of Hedgehog mortars, hoping for better luck. The first of these now connected truthfully with the target. A direct hit was achieved, but the submarine's crew remained resolute, refusing to surrender without a fight. The I-16 continued its desperate maneuvering, evading additional Hedgehog strikes with uncanny agility. Each new attack resulted in another miss. Yet the Japanese vessel was perilously close to slipping away into the depths. Its crew knew that time was running out, and their chances of survival depended on their ability to outmaneuver their relentless pursuers. Shortly after 2:30 in the afternoon, the USS England's sonar finally re-established a solid lock onto the submarine. Commander Pendleton, observing the situation with urgency, turned to his crew and issued a clear and commanding order: "Fire Hedgehogs." His voice carried the weight of imminent danger, and as the order was given, the crew launched another volley of Hedgehog mortars. These projectiles arched forward in a carefully calculated trajectory, propelling themselves directly toward the menacing, fish-shaped target beneath the water. This relentless pursuit, characterized by adaptive tactics and technological innovation, exemplified the intensity and complexity of underwater warfare during this critical period of the Second World War. The successful deployment of Hedgehog weaponry and the cooperation of Allied surface ships proved decisive in hunting down and destroying enemy submarines that once seemed nearly impossible to catch. Moments passed, yet the aftermath of the explosion was unmistakable. A violent blast had shuddered through the ocean, causing a dramatic and sudden upheaval of the water surface. The mighty silhouette of the ocean's surface was disturbed when the stern of the vessel known as England's Fantail was forcibly lifted out of the water, as if by some mighty hand, and simultaneously, a powerful force slammed the deck beneath the sailors' feet with such intensity that many were thrown off balance. For a fleeting interval of time, the crew members of the American fleet believed that their own vessel had been the target of a torpedo strike, mistakenly assuming that they had been under attack. However, their optimism was short-lived. Gradually, they began to notice troubling signs. Patches of oily sheen rising to the surface, shimmering and spreading out like a slick, unnatural film over the water, announcing the presence of a damaged vessel or perhaps a sinking one. This was soon followed by a scattering of debris, fragmented remnants of furniture that had broken apart during the explosion, pieces of twisted, mangled metal that once formed parts of the submarine's internal structure, and the final remnants of supplies and provisions that had never reached their intended destination and bin, now floating aimlessly in the water. It became abundantly clear that the submarine I-16 had departed this world, vanished beneath the waves beneath the surface, leaving behind only its wreckage and memories. With her destruction, England had claimed her first victory in this intense confrontation, presiding over a clear message to all submarines operating in the vicinity. As long as England remained active in these waters, no submarine could presume safety or immunity from attack, as her presence and firepower would threaten their very existence. Later that night, as the ongoing hunt for I-16 continued, another dramatic sequence of events unfolded not far from the scene. While the American ships of Escort Division 39 relentlessly searched for their elusive prey, a separate engagement was taking place in the skies above the ocean. U.S. Navy strategic bombers had spotted and effectively neutralized the submarine Roe 117, reducing her to wreckage on the ocean floor. Nevertheless, Admiral William F. Halsey, who was in command of the United States Third Fleet, harbored doubts about the supposed solitary nature of Roe 117's activity. His intelligence, gleaned from intercepted communication signals, suggested that Admiral Toyota was orchestrating a broader and more widespread deployment of submarines throughout the region. Based on this information, Halsey issued orders for a powerful destroyer group to expand their patrol, covering the vast expanse of surrounding waters where Roe 117 had last been seen going down. This was a precautionary measure, designed to intercept and eliminate any additional enemy submarines that could be lurking beneath the surface. The submarines in question belonged to Japan's Buckley-class, also classified as coastal submarines from the NA line. These vessels were notably smaller than Japan's more formidable fleet submarines, yet they were no less deadly in their operational capacity. Built for quick, precise ambushes and close-range defense, they boasted remarkable agility and stealth. Capable of reaching maximum speeds of approximately 14¼ knots on the surface and about 8 knots when submerged, these vessels could swiftly dart through the water to strike adversaries with their 21-inch torpedoes. Their small size and streamlined design enabled them to vanish into the depths in a flash, often before the target could even respond, making them formidable opponents in their own right. As the American naval forces, namely the USS England, USS George, and USS Raby, advanced through the treacherous waters off the coast of Manus Island, they faced a persistent threat, that of the Buckley-class submarines executing vicious hit-and-run tactics. Visibility was severely hampered after sunset, with the entire sea turning a deep, impenetrable black as darkness descended. The only means available to the ships for detection was radar, which became their sole hope for locating enemies hidden beneath the shadows of the water surface. Despite these difficulties, the ships continued their diligent search, resolute in their mission. The tension aboard the ships was palpable, tension that heightened during the pre-dawn hours of May the 22nd, when a sudden crackling sound of excitement cut through the quiet on the bridge of the USS George. At precisely 3:50 in the morning, their radar equipment detected a faint, unnatural surface contact, an enemy submarine moving just within the range of their sensors. Instantly, the order was given for England to hold her position, forming a protective arc to contain the target, while George and Raby pressed forward to intercept the foe. As the two ships approached the last known coordinates of the contact, George shone her powerful searchlight across the darkened sea, slicing through the blackness with a bright, piercing beam. And there, partially illuminated by the beam's glow, was the enemy submarine Roe 106, a vessel from Toyota's NA line, fulfilling its role as a vigilant sentry. In that moment, Roe 106 was beginning her descent, submarine-like, into the depths. George launched her first volley of Hedgehog anti-submarine projectiles, the specialized spigot mortars designed to strike positions ahead of the incoming vessel. The expectant sailors watched anxiously as the Hedgehog charges plunged into the water, but nothing of note happened. No explosions, no detonations, no signs of a hit. The submarine, in response, vanished from sight as if swallowed by the darkness. 10 minutes later, enjoyably persistent, England's sonar managed to re-establish contact with the elusive submarine. Without hesitation, Commander Walton B. Pendleton ordered a fresh volley of Hedgehogs to be launched into the water, aiming to finish the engagement. Nonetheless, once again, there was no explosion, no sign of destruction, only silence. It appeared that Roe 106 had judged it better to retreat, choosing either to evade pursuit or perhaps to prepare a counterattack of her own. Perhaps she hoped to throw her pursuers off balance, or perhaps she merely intended to set up an ambush herself. Whatever strategy she was employing, her sudden change in course granted Pendleton and his crew a new opportunity, a chance to line up another shot to strike and possibly turn the tide of the night's dangerous game beneath the waves. On a tense and quiet day at sea, the formidable British destroyer USS England launched her powerful mortars high into the sky from her bow, aiming with precision and resolve at an unseen enemy lurking in the depths below. Only moments later, the ominous echo of 3 consecutive explosions rippled through the ocean, each detonating with a thunderous force that reverberated across the surface. These violent eruptions seemed to mark a decisive moment in a relentless pursuit, as the crew aboard USS England watched anxiously as their shells found their mark. As the vessel slowly advanced towards the anticipated impact zone, a dark, oily stain visibly spread out across the water, a grim testament to the destruction just inflicted. The enemy submarine had vanished into the depths, leaving behind only the aftermath of the fierce attack. To this very day, the exact fate of the submarine, known as Roe 106, remains shrouded in mystery. Some military historians and veterans believe that, while the British mortar strike may have inflicted serious damage upon the submarine, it was ultimately the decision of Roe 106's crew to scuttle their vessel. That is, to deliberately sink her, rather than surrender into the hands of the advancing American forces. This act of self-destruction was driven by their desire to avoid capture, out of fear of humiliation, or perhaps because they believed it was the only honorable choice remaining amidst the chaos of war. In fact, within a remarkably short span of only 3 days, the USS England had already established an astonishing record. She had successfully sent 2 enemy submarines to the bottom of the ocean, demonstrating her prowess and effectiveness in submarine warfare. This remarkable achievement can be summarized succinctly with a phrase: 3 for 3, meaning all 3 enemies encountered during this period had been eliminated by her crew and weapons, leaving no survivors or traces for the enemy to recover. The very next day, after having sunk Roe 106, the escort division, which was a group of specialized ships tasked with hunting and destroying submarines, continued their relentless patrol through the treacherous waters along the naval route known as the NA Line, established under the command of Admiral Toyota. Yet, as they moved forward, the atmosphere at sea grew increasingly hostile and unpredictable, as if the very environment had conspired against them. An overcast sky, heavy with a dull layer of gray clouds, cloaked the ocean in darkness, reducing visibility and making their task more difficult. Under these conditions, the early hours of May 23rd found the destroyer escorts not only relying on their radar systems to locate enemies, but also depending heavily on the vigilance of their experienced crews and the alertness of Allied patrol aircraft flying overhead. One such aircraft at first detected the presence of a Japanese submarine designated Roe 104, surfacing approximately 250 nautical miles to the north of Caveying, situated on the island of New Ireland. At precisely 6:10 in the morning, the radar aboard USS Raby, another ship in the escort group, lit up with a reading: Roe 104 had been detected just 4 miles away. Recognizing the threat, the 3 ships, Raby, England, and another escort vessel, immediately sprang into action, increasing their speeds as their engines roared with determination. They rapidly closed the distance, intent on bringing the enemy to battle. But the submarine, fully aware of the encroaching danger, quickly dove beneath the surface before her ships could secure a clear and clean attack. Raby was the first to launch her assault, firing a spread of Hedgehog mortars into the sea in an effort to crush the hidden enemy. Sadly, these projectiles struck only water, failing to find their target and leaving the submarine undetected at that precise moment. Not discouraged, Raby maneuvered and prepared for another attack run. During this time, Roe 104 responded with a countermeasure: sonar jamming pulses, powerful acoustic signals designed to confuse the American sound detectors. These bursts flooded the water around the submarine, creating a chaotic environment that made it significantly more difficult for the American sonar operators to pinpoint her exact location or to maintain accurate targeting. Despite these obstacles, the task fell once again to USS England, a ship renowned for her skill and determination in anti-submarine warfare. She responded promptly to the developing situation. Her initial volley of mortars failed to hit the mark, but her subsequent attack was successful and devastating. About a dozen contact-fused mortars struck the hull of Roe 104 in rapid succession, imparting a severe and immediate impact. An explosion rippled outward beneath the waves, tearing through the submarine with a violence that indicated catastrophic damage. As the chaos unfolded below the surface, the sounds of a submarine being progressively torn apart echoed through the deep waters, signaling the end of Roe 104's existence. Determined to ensure the destruction of the enemy, the crew aboard USS England continued their relentless pursuit by releasing a series of depth charges, 13 in total, designed to eliminate any chance of escape. These powerful charges plunged into the water around the wreckage, guaranteeing that no survivor could slip away or evade the final blow. Hours later, the grim confirmation of victory arrived. Fragments of the Japanese submarine began surfacing, evidence that her hull had been shattered beyond repair and her crew's hopes for survival had been extinguished. The remnants of Roe 104, now broken and scattered, floated to the surface, clearly indicating the success of the American assault. In the days that followed, the intensity of the submarine hunt only intensified further. The operations, led by the same escort division, became increasingly aggressive and relentless. On the night of the 24th of May, the three destroyers, once again racing through the waters, spotted a new sonar contact. The team aboard USS George, one of the escort ships, had detected a different enemy submarine lurking perilously close, just 7 miles away from their position. This new target was identified as Roe 116, another member of the dwindling line of Japanese submarines under the command of Admiral Toyota. The Japanese vessel rapidly began executing evasive maneuvers, attempting to avoid the wrath of the American hunters. Yet, USS England, with her experienced crew and keen sensors, was already closing in on the target and preparing for another attack. When the sonar read the precise location of the submarine, her crew swiftly launched a salvo of Hedgehog mortars, 4 in total, into the dark, murky waters. However, despite the meticulous efforts and well-timed attack, none of the projectiles struck an explosive or caused any visible damage. The torpedoes simply splashed harmlessly into the water, their explosionless impact leaving the enemy submarine still at large and undamaged, at least for the moment. For hours, these American destroyers continued their search, meticulously combing through every ripple, every disturbance on the water's surface, hoping their relentless efforts would eventually reveal the submerged enemy or confirm her destruction. Despite their best efforts, the hunt remained unresolved for a considerable length of time, embodying the ongoing challenge and persistent danger faced during these naval battles. As dawn gradually broke over the vast expanse of the ocean, a faint, yet ominous, sheen began to appear on the water's surface. It was the unmistakable glint of an oil slick, slowly spreading out in dark, iridescent patches that stretched across the waves for miles and miles, a silent testament to the fierce battle that had just taken place beneath the surface. Along with these slick patches, fragments of battered decking, torn from their vessels and torn apart by violent explosions, were carried away by the current, floating aimlessly in the wake of destruction. In the midst of this chaotic scene, the submarine known as Roe 116 had sustained damage during the fight. Despite the wounds it had taken, the vessel managed to limp away from the battlefield, fighting to stay afloat as it retreated from the scene of engagement. However, despite its valiant effort to escape, the injuries proved to be fatal. It would be a full month before the Imperial Japanese Navy publicly confirmed the tragic loss. That Roe 116, along with all members of her crew, had been lost at sea, swallowed by the relentless depths of the Pacific Ocean. Meanwhile, aboard the USS England, the crew was just beginning to realize their hard-won victory, having successfully secured their 4th enemy vessel destroyed. Yet, their triumph was tinged with concern, as their own vessel was increasingly running low on vital supplies. Fuel reserves were dwindling dangerously, bringing the possibility of being stranded in these treacherous waters ever closer. The ship's officers knew that if they wanted to ensure their continued survival and effectiveness in this volatile theater, they would have to make their way to Manus Island, a remote island with a crucial base, where they could resupply, refuel, and rearm. But before they could reach their destination, an urgent threat appeared on their radar screens, just 100 nautical miles from the sheltered haven of Seattler Harbor. Radar operators aboard the Raby and the England detected a new contact, a submarine shadow moving stealthily through the depths. This vessel was identified as the RO-108, part of the Japanese fleet intent on avoiding capture or destruction. Despite their ships being already low on energy, with their ammunition supplies working dangerously close to exhaustion, and their crews battle-worn and weary from relentless combat, Commander Pendleton decisively ordered the division to return to the open sea. It was a calculated peril, an act of daring, yet surrendering the hunt was not an option. The enemy submarine had to be engaged, regardless of the risks involved. Raby took the lead in this renewed offensive, her crew frantically loading one of their final remaining Hedgehog anti-submarine projectiles, preparing to launch yet another desperate attack across the rolling waves. With precise timing, Raby released a perfect arc of mortar-patterned shells into the water, aiming to strike the elusive target. However, the RO-108 managed to evade the deadly volley at the last moment, slipping away just beyond reach. Remaining calm under depleting ammunition and growing pressure, Commander Pendleton issued the critical order to strike again. The ship's crew responded swiftly, launching their Hedgehogs once more from the deck of the England in a coordinated attack. The mortars flew through the air and into the water, detonating in violent underwater explosions that echoed sharply across the water surface, shaking the surrounding region with their ferocity. These violent detonations created a jagged web of destruction beneath the waves, forcing the Japanese submarine into a perilous game of evade and deceive. By the next morning, the battered, yet victorious, destroyers, scarred from the night's relentless pursuit, limped into the safe harbor of Manus Island. There, they refueled their ships, replenished their ammunition, including the precious Hedgehog rounds, and prepared for the final, decisive phase of their ongoing campaign. The Japanese naval forces, led by the infamous Toyota's naval attack line, were on the brink of collapse, their strategic position unraveling under relentless pressure. Escort Division 39 was resolutely determined to see their mission through to the bitter end, to bring the fight to a conclusive close and deal a decisive blow to the enemy. Out at sea, a fierce, protracted engagement known as the 30-hour duel was unfolding. To bolster their strength, the American forces had received reinforcements. A second hunter-killer group, commanded by the escort carrier USS Hoggett Bay, accompanied by a formidable array of supporting vessels, including the destroyers USS Hazelwood and USS McCord, along with the destroyer escort USS Spangler. As this formidable group moved forward to bolster the maritime front, the Japanese fleet began adopting rigorous countermeasures to protect their remaining submarines. Widespread warnings were dispatched across the region, instructing every Japanese submarine to abandon their positions and evade the advancing American hunters at all costs. Most of these vessels, understanding the gravity of the threat, responded swiftly, diving deep into the dark, cold depths of the vast Pacific with expert precision, slipping away from the reach of sonar and torpedoes. Yet one submarine, the RO-105, remained stubbornly in the area. Whether her crew never received the urgent warning, or whether they deliberately chose to stay at their post despite the evident danger, remains uncertain to this day. Whatever the reason, the decision was a gamble, one that risked not only their mission but the very lives of those on board. Early on the morning of the 30th of May, USS Hazelwood made contact with the submerged RO-105. Without hesitation, the American destroyer launched a series of depth charges in a concentrated pattern, an effort to obliterate the enemy submarine before she could submerge for good. Despite their aggressive assault, the attack failed to destroy the target. The Japanese vessel fought on with fierce resilience. In response, RO 105 began a desperate series of evasive maneuvers, releasing oil and debris into the water to create a confusing cloud of false signals, simulating her own destruction, while fishtailing and zigzagging, skillfully evading the sonar's reach with each passing moment. The USS George and USS Raby relentlessly pursued her, launching barrage after barrage of Hedgehog projectiles and depth charges in a relentless effort to sink her. For hours, the ongoing struggle continued, a tense cat-and-mouse game beneath the unforgiving surface of the sea, with the outcome hanging in delicate balance. During that intense engagement, a total of 16 separate attacks were launched, each one carefully coordinated and executed with precision. Yet surprisingly, none of these assaults resulted in a single successful hit. The relentless barrage reflected the skill and resilience of both sides, but amid the chaos and smoke, a critical moment unfolded when the Japanese submarine RO 105 unexpectedly surfaced. Its emergence was nothing short of impeccable timing. It appeared exactly at the moment when the American ships were most vulnerable and in the wrong position to engage effectively. This submarine rose directly between the two primary American vessels, George and Raby, positioning itself strategically in the narrowest gap possible. The American ships found themselves in a frustrating standstill. They were completely locked into a deadly game of patience, unable to open fire without risking devastating friendly fire incidents, as the threat of hitting their own comrades was imminent. As the seconds painfully stretched into minutes, the fleeting hope of turning the tide was slipping further away. The sun's first rays crept over the horizon, casting a pale glow over the tumultuous scene, and with that dawn came urgent news. Japanese aircraft were rapidly approaching. With limited time remaining, the decision was made to withdraw the ships from the area. The risk of remaining longer was too great, as the possibility of being directly attacked by the incoming aircraft loomed large. Orders were issued swiftly. The American destroyers had to retreat from their position at once, abandoning their pursuit of RO 105 and prioritizing their own safety. However, not everyone was willing to accept this course of action without protest. Commander Walton Pendleton, aboard one of the ships, was visibly frustrated. He had yet to have his chance to take a shot at the elusive enemy submarine, and the thought of retreat without firing a decisive shot did not sit well with him. He quickly established radio contact with Commander Hamilton Haynes, who was commanding the USS George nearby. Pendleton made a desperate plea, requesting a single opportunity, a last-ditch shot, before the entire formation pulled back. Nearly 30 hours had passed since the initial contact with the submarine, a relentless pursuit that tested the endurance and resolve of the American fleet. Finally, as daylight reached its peak, the ship named England surged forward once again, breaking away from the cover of darkness into the decisive attack run. Below the surface, RO 105 desperately tried to evade the approaching vessel, weaving through the water in a frantic attempt to avoid destruction. Despite her efforts, it was all in vain. The ship's deck was laden with Hedgehogs, specialized anti-submarine projectiles, and moments later, a deafening series of explosions shook the ocean. Sea water erupted violently as two depth charges detonated in tandem, unleashing shockwaves that rocked the deck of the England and caused sailors standing nearby to stagger uncontrollably. When the violent chaos subsided, an astonishing realization settled over the entire escort division. They had accomplished what many believed to be impossible. In a span of just 12 days, the formidable fleet of Japanese submarines had been reduced by sinking 6 enemy submarines, an extraordinary feat that marked a turning point in the naval campaign. The commander of a USS George, Hamilton Haynes, seized the moment to communicate a message over the radio. His voice expressed both disbelief and admiration as he pressed the button to transmit a question that echoed the sentiments of all. God damn it! How do you do it? This question captured the awe and the frustration of the American fleet, who had encountered an extraordinary level of skill and luck in their relentless pursuit of the elusive enemy. By this point, Escort Division 39 had fundamentally crippled the Japanese Navy's early warning system, which was known as the NA Line, a series of submarines and reconnaissance assets designed to alert Japan's fleet of approaching enemies. Their efforts had been remarkably successful. They had managed to sink 5 of the original 7 submarines deployed by Japan in the region, effectively dismantling the backbone of the Japanese underground defense network. For the following 2 weeks, the division continued its relentless patrols across the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, tirelessly searching for the remaining submarine survivors, RO-109 and RO-112. Though in reality, they were already fleeing and retreating, aware that further resistance was futile after their failed attempts to conceal themselves. These last remnants of Japan's underwater screen had received warning signals and orders that their resistance was no longer tenable, prompting them to abandon their stations. The loss of these submarines suddenly left the Japanese Imperial Navy completely blind, severing their ability to track U.S. fleet movements with any accuracy or coordination. The strategic advantage shifted dramatically in favor of the Allies, exposing Japan's flawed assumptions about their underwater defenses. Without reliable intelligence, Japanese forces began to mismanage their resources. They wasted fuel and mobilized forces that were no longer needed, leaving critical island bases and strategic ports dangerously underdefended and vulnerable to attack. The grand ambitions of Japan's Operation Ego, an audacious plan to launch a decisive and overwhelming strike against the advancing United States Navy, began to crumble under the weight of these losses. The hope of catching the Americans unprepared and out of position was dashed, and the Japanese Navy's hopes for a swift and decisive victory seemed increasingly unattainable. By June of the year 1944, the Pacific War reached a critical juncture, culminating in what would be remembered as the Battle of the Philippine Sea. The Japanese, having rebuilt their carrier force, expected to deliver a crippling blow to the American fleet. They had been lured into what they thought would be a surprise engagement, relying on limited surveillance and intelligence to mask their intentions. Instead, they found themselves walking straight into a trap, an overwhelming defensive network guarded by advanced radar systems and hundreds of seasoned U.S. pilots flying the brand new Grumman F-6F Hellcats. The U.S. Navy's countermeasures proved devastatingly effective. Within hours, more than 350 Japanese aircraft had been shot down, many before even reaching the American ships, effectively preventing the Japanese from executing their planned strike. This battle marked the definitive destruction of Japan's once feared naval air power, and force that had inflicted significant damage on American interests, including the infamous attack on Pearl Harbor, and had terrorized the Pacific region for years. The ferocity of this defeat echoed across the Pacific theater, signaling a turning point in the war effort. Among the many sailors and officers witnessing this defeat was Ensign John C., whose ship shared in the chaos and heroism of the conflict. The story of the USS England finally reached a victorious conclusion, but it was a victory tinged with both pride and bittersweet remembrance. This distinguished vessel went on to earn the prestigious Presidential Unit Citation, an honor awarded to units that demonstrate extraordinary heroism in action against an armed enemy, alongside 10 battle stars that signified her participation in key battles and campaigns throughout her service. Despite these accolades and the remarkable achievements under her belt, the USS England's active combat role was relatively brief. Shortly after her remarkable submarine hunting campaign, Lieutenant Commander Pendleton received reassignments that took him away from her decks. He was entrusted with leading a different escort division stationed in the frigid waters of Alaska, tasked with safeguarding logistical and tactical assets in the far northern theater for the remainder of the ongoing global conflict. Meanwhile, command of the USS England was transferred to Officer John Williamson, who would oversee her further service. During the year of 1944, the ship underwent a significant shift in her operational focus. She transitioned from dedicated submarine warfare to become a fundamental component of the convoy escort fleet, playing a vital role in establishing and maintaining a network of forward bases and supply routes that stretched across the vast Pacific Ocean. This strategic repositioning was instrumental in laying the groundwork for the United States' final assault on the remaining Japanese strongholds deep within the Pacific Islands. The USS England's role in this phase was crucial, serving as a reliable guardian of vital supply lines and ensuring that troop transports and cargo ships could reach their destination safely. For months, her operational activity remained relatively uneventful, until a decisive moment in history occurred on the 9th of May, 1945. At that time, the USS England was stationed off the coast of Okinawa, an island that had become a focal point of intense fighting and strategic importance in the final stages of the Pacific War. On that day, the quiet was shattered by the sudden appearance of 3 Japanese aircraft flying in from the skies above. With lethal intent, these planes launched themselves on a kamikaze mission, aiming to destroy the vital ship through a suicidal crash dive. The crew aboard the USS England responded instantaneously, their training and discipline taking over. The ship's gun crews quickly mounted their artillery, striving to intercept and neutralize the oncoming attackers. Bright tracer fire streaked upward, lighting up the sky as it collided with one of the enemy planes, causing it to explode spectacularly in flames. The remaining 2 aircraft were eventually intercepted by American combat air patrols overhead, which delivered precise and devastating strikes that sent them plunging into the ocean below. However, the first kamikaze's final act of vengeance was not thwarted by the American defenses. The pilot, despite the raging fire engulfing his craft, maintained control and deliberately steered his burning aircraft directly into the starboard side of the USS England. The impact struck just below the bridge, a critical area of the ship, and caused a massive explosion as a bomb detonated upon contact. The brutal blast immediately claimed the lives of 37 brave men, whose sacrifices underscored the deadly seriousness of kamikaze attacks. Another 25 crew members sustained injuries, some severe, as the ship's crew fought desperately to contain the flames erupting all around them. Despite the ferocity of the attack and the extensive damage inflicted, the crew's relentless efforts in battling the inferno ultimately saved the ship from destruction. They managed to extinguish the fires and stabilize the vessel, but the damage was profound. The USS England was severely compromised, requiring urgent repairs. In the immediate aftermath, temporary repairs were carried out with the intention of making her seaworthy enough to return to the United States for comprehensive restoration. Unfortunately, the timing of these events coincided with the final collapse of the war effort, which brought about a swift end to hostilities before the ship could undergo full repairs. With the conflict concluded and military budgets tightening in the post-war era, a critical decision was made regarding the fate of the USS England. She would not return to active service or combat operations. After nearly 2 years of distinguished service at sea, since her initial commissioning, she was officially decommissioned on October 15, 1945. This marked the end of her active life, a poignant moment reflecting both her sacrifices and her importance in a larger conflict. In the years that followed, the legacy of the USS England endured. During 1963, in recognition of her notable history and the valor of her crews, a new ship was christened USS England, but this time it was a modern Leahy-class guided missile cruiser. This vessel sought to carry forward the proud heritage of her namesake, serving in subsequent conflicts such as the Vietnam War and later participating in Operation Desert Storm. Nonetheless, the original campaign of the USS England in May of 1944, her daring and highly successful anti-submarine operations, remained unmatched in history. As historian W.H. Holmes eloquently summarized, her extraordinary efforts against Japanese submarines represented perhaps the most brilliant and effective anti-submarine operation ever recorded, setting a standard for naval warfare that endures in historical memory.